to episode 0 of the Light After Trauma podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Scolari, and I'm so excited to be here with you guys. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different than all the other episodes. It's going to be a little bit shorter. Today, I really just wanted to take time to explain to you the inspiration behind this podcast, as well as what you're going to be able to expect from all future episodes. I wanted to start out with the inspiration behind the Light After Trauma podcast. And in order to do that, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on who I am and what I do. So I'm a trauma therapist in Southern New Jersey. I am 28 years old, and I have been in the field for about 6 years at this point. I work with adolescents and adults who have histories of loss and trauma, who are abuse survivors. And what I have found through the work is that so many of them have coped by suppressing or repressing their traumas, and as a result, developing raging eating disorders and addictions and other habits that ultimately could prove to be fatal to them. I also work with adolescents and adults who have histories of other types of self-harm, including cutting, burning, choking themselves. And again, I have found that all of these symptoms lead back to a history of trauma or loss. Simultaneously, I am also navigating my own journey of recovery from complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I too am a trauma warrior. Over the years, through providing therapy to others and through going through my own therapy, I have found that there really is, in fact, light that can be found in the aftermath of trauma and traumatic loss. I have seen that over the last few years alone, this world is rapidly changing in that trauma survivors and abuse survivors are speaking out more, telling their truths, and we are now starting to hold perpetrators accountable. And I have been so inspired by this. I know for a fact that the change in these times is what helped me to start speaking up about my abuse. And I also know that these changes are what have helped so many of my patients in my practice speak out about their abuse as well. And as wonderful as all of this is, I still look around and I see a world full of trauma survivors who are carrying so much shame, guilt, anger, fear. It's getting in the way of them being able to live full, happy lives, and it's getting in the way of them being able to build healthy relationships. I am seeing almost on a daily basis in my practice how trauma is causing people to cope with eating disorders and addictions and self-harm, and people are simply just going through the motions of life. And over the years, I've realized that despite the many powerhouse trauma warriors that are already in this field, speaking up about abuse and trying to change the laws, there is still so much work to be done in terms of spreading hope and spreading awareness. Ultimately, this is what sparked the idea for the Light After Trauma podcast. I wanted to create a space where trauma survivors can come together to learn not just how to survive post-traumatic stress disorder, but ultimately to thrive in the aftermath of trauma and loss, because it can be done. Sometimes trauma can make us feel like our life is over, but one of the things that I've learned throughout my recovery and throughout watching other people recover is that trauma cannot undo us. And that is one of the main messages that I'm here to spread through this podcast. So I want to transition now to discuss a little bit about what you can expect as a listener from these podcast episodes. I plan on putting out weekly episodes, and it's going to be a mixture of solo episodes as well as episodes where there are interviews with other experts in the field, trauma warriors, and authors. The goal of these episodes is not only to learn more about the physical, emotional, and social aspects of trauma, but also to explore ways that we can overcome the obstacles that we face as a result of what we've been through. As trauma survivors, I think that we see the world much differently than those without a trauma history, and even life's most simplest tasks can sometimes seem overwhelming or overbearing for us because of our trauma. And some of what I've seen as both an abuse survivor myself and as a trauma therapist is that our histories and what happened to us can affect us in ways that we aren't even aware of. And part of the goal of this podcast is also to shed light in those areas where we may not even have realized that our trauma is affecting us. So at the end of the day, this podcast ultimately is going to be educational, it's going to be inspirational, and it's going to be a journey, one that I'm going to be walking through with you guys since I'm in recovery from trauma myself. And I believe without a shred of doubt that one of the keys to recovery is in being aware and owning and speaking your pain and your story. And we're going to do that on this journey together. So for future episodes, I have interviews lined up. I have a variety of topics for us to discuss. I have tips and tools and resources for all of you. But ultimately, I want to hear from you guys. I've created a weekly newsletter that you guys can sign up for if you head over to my website at alyssascolari.com. When you sign up for this newsletter, one of the first questions that you're going to be asked is, what is one of the biggest challenges that you face in your journey to healing from trauma and loss? You can respond to that email directly and it will come to me personally, and I will take the time to respond to you. When you sign up for the Light After Trauma newsletter, not only do you get the opportunity to share feedback about what you want to hear on the podcast, but you also get weekly emails with updates on new podcast episodes, blog posts, and my personal favorite, access to the private Facebook community. Once you sign up for the newsletter, you are given automatic access into our private Facebook community where you can connect with me and other trauma survivors. I know one of the most difficult parts about being a trauma survivor is that we sometimes feel like we are so alone in the world, which is why I wanted to create this private Facebook group. It's meant to be a safe space where we can talk with one another. I'm very active in the community, and I would love to connect with you guys. And last but not least, as I mentioned, all of our podcast episodes will be supplemented with resources, insider tips, and infographics that help you to gain a little bit more understanding about some of the topics that we discuss on the show. Signing up for the newsletter will also give you access to that. So again, just head over to my website at alyssascolari.com to sign up for that newsletter. I think that's a wrap for today. I just wanted to, again, take the time to introduce myself and talk about the inspiration behind this podcast. I am really looking forward to walking in this path with you guys. Thanks. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode. For more information about today's episode and to sign up for the Light After Trauma newsletter, head over to my website at alyssascolari.com. I'm also on Twitter and I'd love to chat with you guys. Be sure to follow me. My Twitter handle is Alyssa Scolari. Thanks again for listening and take good care.